I'm Gail. I'm an editor at Understood. I'm here today with Dena Blizzard, who is a fabulous comedian and a friend of Understood. Dena recently was on our first episode of our new podcast,
Yes.
In It, which was fantastic, and you can check it out later. So today we're going to be talking about life at home with kids that learn differently. So before we just jump in and start chatting, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure, you want just the good parts, right? So I am a comedian, as you said. I have 3 kids, and I do a lot of laundry, and I love to talk about, we're very real in my stand-up. So we have a show called One Funny Mother. We toured around the country, and we talk all about those moments where you feel like you're having, going crazy after having kids. And we've had a lot of success with the show. But throughout kind of writing the show, I've been a stand-up for about 15 years. I found that, we discovered that my youngest of the 3 learned a little differently, and anxiety was a big part of who she was. And so, while kind of learning to find the funny in all the situations of my regular life, I found that there were many moments that were not so funny as it pertained to her. And so, we have a show, we tour around the country. We have a show, Tipsy Tuesday. Every Tuesday we drink on the internet. It's a lot of fun. And we have found I had this not so great moment during the transition for my daughter from 8th grade to high school, where I basically just had a breakdown at a CVS. Who doesn't? So, but it was all about this kind of IEP planning, and I don't know. It was not the funny things that we normally do, but it was a very real moment, and I don't know. I think 500,000 people have watched it now, and you guys covered it as well, and so, taking what we normally do as a comedian, just kind of find the funny in life, we are trying to do the same thing on this journey with my daughter. And so we're big fans of talking about anxiety and learning issues. And my daughter has a lot of memory issues and comprehension issues. And I always just felt very alone. And so when you guys came along, it was the right time for us. And I just think that it's a really important part of what we do at One Funny Mother to just kind of put it out there and talk about it. And every time I talk about it, somebody will come over and say, oh my gosh, the same thing happened to me. And so, I think that some of the greatest information I've gotten is from other moms just kind of saying, and they always say it on the slide. They always say, hey, by the way. And it's always like a secret. I'm like, why is this a secret? Why aren't you just telling me? This would have been good to know a week ago. So yeah, that's what we do. We're funny and we're real, and everything that we kind of deal with at our house is openly talked about, and we're really trying to change the way that people talk about it, which is getting people to talk about it. So that's us.
Right, that's terrific, and that's what we're here to do too, which is reduce stigma and get people talking, because there's, no shame, or whatever the word is, to talk and to share.
Yeah.
So, let's start this way.
Okay, hit me.
Okay.
I'm ready.
So, obviously, once you have a child that's in the family that is struggling, who thinks differently, feels differently, the whole family gets involved.
Yeah.
So, can you tell everybody a little bit about what that's like at home for you?
Yeah, so it started in probably 2nd grade with Brooke, and so it was kind of this slow change, right? Up until 2nd grade, we were like, okay, we function like normal people. And then, as she was kind of going through those lower grades and her inability to stay with the class, and she was kind of falling away, we were dealing with, issues with her self-esteem, social issues with how she kind of deals with her friends, which wasn't going well because she was very impulsive. And so I started to really change how our house functioned. Our house became much more organized. Like, I'd love to say I'm organized, but I'm much more organized now than I was when she was in second grade. And so, she would come in and just drop everything just all over the house. And so I had to get cabinets and cubbies and like books go here, shoes go here, backpacks go here. And it couldn't just be for her. It had to be, I'm like, now everybody has to put their shoes here, like you don't want her to feel different. So everybody did it. And then it became obvious that we were not in a good school district for her, and so we ended up moving. It was all very quick, and I was like, okay, so we have to move. And so my husband came home, and I was like, so we've always talked about moving. He was like, yeah. I was like, so we're moving. I already put the house up. You should pack some stuff because it's happening. And so all of that was kind of very insidious, and insidious in some ways, and then just starkly different. There were so many times. I was just talking to somebody the other day about how, something as simple as a trip, as a ride, to go see my sister. She lives in Virginia, 5 hours for us. Wasn't so simple, because I would make an announcement like, we're going to go see Aunt Nikki. And then it was 5 days of, I don't think I can go to Aunt Nikki's, and talking about the anxiety associated with being in the car for that long. And she wasn't going to go. She was just going to stay with grandma. And it was just all this talking. And then it changed. Like, I found that I would wait till the last minute to tell her we were going anywhere, because I thought that was a better plan. And then I was like, get up, we're going to Aunt Nikki's. And then it was like a complete meltdown. And so just the small things that you take for granted every day, these accommodations. And then if it became painfully obvious that her anxiety was going to control the situation, and so we weren't going to Aunt Nikki's, or we weren't going to go to the park because she wasn't capable of being with us. And so now you have two kids that want to go to the park and one kid who's making it impossible. And how do you know when to give in to that kid and when to try to, slightly modify the trip for that kid? It was everything. It was every part of our life. And I think that we've become so used to it now that when you ask me, I'm like, no, it's not that different. But now when I think about it, Kayla, you're bringing up a lot of bad memories.
Oh, great.
I'm kidding.
Glad I could do that.
Transition. The transition was difficult at times.
So, you have two other kids.
I do.
And they're older, so they sort of had a life pre and a life post.
Yes.
So how did they adjust? What was their transition?
So I have a son. So they're all 2 years apart. My son is the oldest, then my middle daughter, and then my youngest, Brooke, is the one we're discussing. And my son and my youngest are so far apart, and they're different genders, so there wasn't a big problem between the two of them. They really didn't have the same friends. They didn't hang out with the same people, didn't do the same activities. There was definitely a point with the two girls, who are only 2 years apart, where it just became really difficult, where you wonder, like, are they even going to like each other after this, right? Because Brooke would say, when up against the wall, when she would do something wrong or being called out for something, she would just verbally attack somebody. She would lie all the time. It was very difficult. And then when I wasn't around, if they were with the neighborhood kids, sadly, I had to put it on Jacqueline to say, like, if your sister is saying something inappropriate, you need to say something, which of course backfired, because then she would call her out. I was like, okay, so now we have to have a code. We have to use the code, right? Like, you need macaroni, like something that made no sense, or you love bananas. And then she would ignore the code, and then she'd tell everybody what the code was. It was awful. But it leveled out, in some ways it was good to have her sister there. But then when they didn't have the same friends, and Brooke was on her own, then the bottom fell out. There was nobody monitoring her. But she was a little bit more mature, and we sat down with all the neighborhood kids and had to have a really honest conversation with them. And I'm like, Jacqueline's not around anymore to monitor her. She doesn't need a monitor. She should be able to modify herself. But you would need to be able to tell her. You need to say to her, this upsets me when you say this. And so luckily we have some really lovely neighbors who are very kind and understanding. And so that's been constant, so it's been another journey.
Do you find that Brooke and even the other two are sort of more open about the challenges because you are?
Yeah, I think that they actually think that they're weirdos when they talk about it because, Brooke will see another kid at school and she'll say, I have anxiety too. And the kid will look around like, because Brooke because it's been 6 or 7 years of dealing with anxiety, she's very keen on, oh, you got what I got, right? But sometimes people don't want to hear that they have what you have. And so they're genuinely surprised when they kind of say to people, well, I have depression or I have anxiety. And then they'll see, similar to my experience, which is you put it out into the universe, you become kind of this vulnerable person. And then 20 people will find you and say, oh my gosh, I have the same thing. And I've never told anybody. And, what medicine you're on, how does it work for you? I actually think that in our house, it's super normal to talk about it. I think when they go out in the universe and they talk about it, they're genuinely surprised at the reaction that they get from people, which is, knock on wood, been a good reaction, and I was like, listen, not everyone's going to have a lovely reaction to you talking about your stuff, but don't hang out with those people. You have to find your people.
And did you at some point, earlier on, have to sort of sit down as a family and explain? Did you spend time,
we definitely sat down
to the others?
We definitely sat down as a family. I don't know if it was to explain because I feel like they already knew, like, it's not going well. I think it was more to sit down as a family to just kind of take stock in where we were, to let them know how bad it was at times and, what we could do for each other to make it better. And a big thing was, learning to identify when somebody was triggered and then not making it worse. I can't stop somebody from being triggered, but I think that for the rest, there's 5 of us in the house and 2 dogs, right? And so if someone's triggered, you don't have to fix them. They are responsible for their own actions. But if they're triggered, don't make it worse. Don't keep going at them. Like, I'm a big fan of, if you're triggered, you need to figure out what you need to do to get yourself back to level and then come back and be able to verbally say, like, it really upset me when you did this. There's so many adults that can't do that, right? So to try to teach this to children is difficult. And so we definitely sat down, as a family to kind of talk about, what does this look like? What does it look like in public? What does it look like at home? And what are the best ways we can help each other?
Wow. Okay, so talk about openness. Your whole family is open.
We're all talking about it.
It's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's something that happened to me. I don't know if it happened to you.
Okay.
So when my son was first diagnosed with ADHD, everybody told me that I needed to be more organized. There had to be routines there, and I'm a very spontaneous person.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have an older child. We sort of all function this one way.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of sat there going, oh my God, I'm going to have like a radical personality change in order to raise this child and help this child.
Yes.
And I just didn't know how that was going to happen. Did you find that you had to sort of change your own thing?
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not as organized as I am now, like naturally. So that's weird for me. I think the biggest things were having to do with education. I had 2 what we'll call typical learners before Brooke who, they would get their homework, they would sit down, they would do their homework, and I would say, let me check it. And I really wouldn't check it, but I would look at it and pretend and then move on. And so for Brooke, it became very obvious, literally in 3rd grade, that she wasn't comprehending anything and nothing was really getting through in the classroom, and she was failing everything. And literally for years, 5 hours on an easy day of tutoring her. And I'm not a teacher. I'm not trained as a teacher, but I had to become this tutor for her, and literally every day we would try a different study skill or different modality, because she would be rolling around on the floor, I'd be rolling around on the floor, and I was like, this isn't working, let's try something else. And I would have her walk around the room and just repeat it over and over again. I'm like, that's not working. Okay, so now we're gonna put it on cards. One of the best things we came up with, because we were running out of options, like nothing was working. We have a really old house that has like this giant window and has all those squares, like grandma's house, know? And so she loves manipulatives. Like, she loves to be moving. You can't sit her down. It's just not going to work. And so we would have note cards and we'd move them around. And so I found those markers that you can use on windows.
Right.
And so I was like, all right, this is your whole palette. You can use this whole thing. So we were talking about like the 5 rules of the president. I was like, these 5 squares, right? The 5 rules of the president. And I was like, now take these cards and put them in each of the squares they belong in. Like, it just became, you know, me not only trying to teach her whatever the subject was, but for me to really study her brain. Because by the time we would get into the IEP meeting and they'd say, we're going to try this, I was like, we already did that. Doesn't work. They were like, well, then we're going to do this. That doesn't work either. You know, it became my whole life, to the point where I was seriously considering homeschooling, because I was like, I'm already doing 5 hours. That's probably a full day of homeschooling. And, you know, it's just not part of my DNA to take that on. Like, I don't know that I could do all the subjects. We were focused on like one subject, like 5 hours of history or whatever. And so it was just all these questions. And you know, my husband is wonderful. And I'd love to say that he has carried the load with me. No, he has not. He's been real supportive. Like, come on, you can do it. But, you know, I think that is probably true. I mean, you guys would know more than I do, but the majority of the responsibility for education falls on the woman. And I would be at every IEP meeting. He couldn't make the meetings, and so I'd be calling him crying after, and he didn't understand it because he wasn't there. And I was like, no, they're literally telling me that this isn't true, and I'm saying it was all of that. It was the emotional components of the meetings. It was trying to teach her things when I'm not in the classroom, and she can't even tell me what she was supposed to know. So I would be texting the teacher or emailing and saying, which one is it? And she didn't have half the stuff half the time. So I think that part, you know, after having 2 typical learners, that part for me, it was very natural. Like, I was like, this is what I have to do. Like, it wasn't an option to not do it.
Right. But
after, you know, it was a blur, but after, like, you know, 6 months of that, just kind of turning around and just saying, like, what has our life come to? Like, this is just so different and so difficult. And I learned so much from that time period. You know, even now, I'm like, that doesn't work. But it's like another full-time job, I felt.
do you feel like it changed you?
Yes.
What? Okay,
Yeah,
let's
you know,
hear.
I always say to people, if I didn't have Brooke, I don't know that any of this conversation would make sense to me. Like, I wonder if whoever's watching this, if you have a child that's different, you're like, totally, that totally happened, right? Like, so many of these stories are so, you know, universal. But if you don't have a kid, or you're raising a kid, or even know a kid that you just love that's maybe not yours, if you don't have that kid in your life, I don't know that this makes much sense. I think you can understand it, but I don't know that you really get the passion or the emotion behind it, because I feel like every mom, no matter where they are, where their kids are, is always thinking about, what does this look like 10 years from now? You know, like, everybody's like, I want this kid to pass, but the bigger picture is what does this mean for my kid, and what can I do to prepare them, and sadly lowering expectations, which I think is the hardest part in all of it. There's, you know, that's what that meeting was at CVS. My breakdown was trying to decide whether she was going to a regular high school or if she was going to a tech school, which would have been fine. If she wants to be a hairdresser, be a hairdresser, but they were literally writing her off in 8th grade. And I was like, you're not listening. I don't think she has to go there. I think we're just not teaching her the way that she understands. And to write somebody off in 8th grade, to me, was just devastating, and really made me think about, like, you know, when my other 2 kids were going through school systems, I was like, yeah, you should learn all the explorers. Yeah, you should regurgitate all the things back, and maybe you'll use some of this in the long run. When it was Brooke, I remember she had to learn 15 explorers. Where was their country of origin? What was the trade route that they had gone on? And I was like, no one's ever going to ask you this. This is not important. In real life, like, you start to pare down, what are the skill sets that this child needs to be successful? They're not going to, you know, go to law school or med school, but they need to learn how they learn. And where is that part of how we treat a typical learner? And so, again, that whole thing made me really think about, education and what we should be doing. And I don't know if I've told you this, but the video of my breakdown at the CVS, it was sad, very sad. I can't watch it. But so many people from, whether it's social worker training or teacher training have emailed and said, would you mind if we use your video in our classes? Like, our people on the other side of the table need to know that this is what parents are thinking on this side of the table. Like, I don't, and it was such a raw video. Like, there was really no thought to it. I don't even really remember most of what I said. But, I just thought it was a very interesting take on this kind of breakdown in the moment. But you're like, I guess nobody really teaches you how vulnerable parents are on this side and how much we rely on these tips that you're giving us. And I'm sure these tips were tips that you learned in school and in your training, but those tips don't apply to every kid. And how to be malleable and how to adjust to each child and how to really listen to what parents are saying. So
let me ask you something, because you touched on it a little bit earlier, which is, you do get really attuned to the child who needs, help and support. And, in your family, that took you becoming like some super educator in a way that, every day was something different. Yeah. But when you're that focused on one child, because that child needs, clearly the support and the help. In your case, and I know in my case, there was another kid whose, difficulties weren't as difficult or as extreme. Yeah. So it's kind of like, put out the big fire and try and hope the other smoldering thing isn't really even a fire.
They'll just figure it out over there. That was definitely part of our story. So I have 3, right? So we talked about Brooke. My oldest, Dean, was starting to have issues in high school. And my middle child, I always say, she basically is raised by wolves. Like, I have no idea. I don't, every once in a while, she's like, can you help me? I'm like, I'm really busy. Like, just, good luck to you. I hope you make it. She's fine. But my older son in high school, started exhibiting some signs. And I had mentioned it to the doctor. And I was like, there's some things, like he procrastinates and he can't stay on point. And it was kind of all of these kind of very minor things compared to Brooke. And I said, I haven't mentioned it to you because in comparison, there's nothing wrong with him. He's fine. But I don't think you're supposed to compare kids. And so if I was to just look at him, I'd be like, there's definitely some minor things going on. And as his senior year started to progress, it was becoming more and more obvious. And so we started him on just some ADD meds, right? We're like, okay, so maybe he just has this kind of ADD component. And then he went to college, and obviously that transition to college is difficult for anybody. And he's a pretty laid-back kid, right? And I think that he has, when you have somebody who's really smart, right, and is able to just kind of adjust to things, I think that it took me longer to catch it with him because I think he just made these adjustments, and now these adjustments weren't working. Now he's in college, and there's no net, and so then he would call me from college. Just he has this cat poster, just the hang in there cat poster, right? He called me from in front of the cat poster with his coat on, probably 3 or 4 times a day for like a week, but with his coat on. I'm like, I still see the cat. Have you gotten up? And he was like, no. Like he had just checked out and I would ask him certain questions and all the questions he was saying, all the wrong answers, right? Like it was clear to me that he was depressed, very depressed, and just couldn't get out of it, and the anxiety, all he talked about was all the things that could go wrong, which was not his MO at all. And so, and so my husband will say, well, you want everybody on medicine. You want everybody. I'm like, I don't. I want people to be able to be educated so they can make, he's 18, and that's what he did. When he left for college, he said, I've made a decision. I'm 18, and I'm not going to take my ADD medicine. I said, okay. I think that's a poor decision, but that is your decision. You're 18, you're a grown man, ish, and I'm going to let you do this. I think this is going to go poorly, but we'll see. And it did. He made it through to about November, and then that's when, you know, his ADD wasn't working, and maybe that triggered the anxiety, which triggered the, like, it was a whole bowl of not good. And the nice thing is that, you know, my daughter had already gone through so many of these things, and she's a pro, right? Like, she's been doing this since second grade, and so she was like counseling my son in college. She's like, here's what you need to do. You need to know your triggers. You need to have some coping mechanisms. Like, it was just so funny. And they sat on the couch and, you know, he really listened. And so, you know, most people don't know that there is this, that we deal with this with Dean. It's mostly Brooke that we talk about. But, you know, he had said, you know, he talked about his depression in one of his classes. And he was like, Mom, I was just so surprised. You know, after class, all these kids were like, I'm on depression medicine too. Like, I'm really having a hard time. And trying to explain to him the difference between him and Brooke. I'm like, Brooke can never get off of her anxiety medicine. Like, hers is just who she is. She can't function, incapable. I was like, yours might just be this transition to college. It's a lot. It's a lot for anybody. And you have options and understanding. But now he's been on and off the medicine. And now he knows, he's been on it long enough to know when he's off of it, he's not right. You know, and to me, that's the most important thing. You know, I was never a big proponent of medicine. We tried everything with Brooke before, but it just became painfully obvious that the amount of time she spent trying to maintain normal was unhealthy. And I was like, she's trying so hard and she's crying every day just to get into the classroom. So we're not learning anything. We're not going to learn anything. And then they kept saying at the school that it was just anxiety. There was no learning disability. And I was like, no, you're not. And so it was really important for us to deal with the anxiety, get her even, and then let's see what's left. And it was just painfully obvious that there was still this learning disability. But we couldn't properly educate her without clearing one of those up. And, you know, anxiety was just the big piece for her. So yeah, I think it's really hard. I think even if there isn't anything wrong with your other kid, I think every mom has mom guilt over focusing on one child, and then to find that, you know, they have been perhaps suffering for a while and you've just been kind of sidetracked. So, you know, I think there's tons of mom guilt across the board, but, you know, you just kind of deal with it as it comes.
Well, and in your family, since everybody's so open, you know, I assume you're able to talk to your son in a way that's just like, ooh, you know, missed that, sorry.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like Brooke, and she's in high school now,
she's 14,
right?
yeah.
That she's like primed for taking care of herself and her needs, like into adulthood. She sounds like really mature when it comes to knowing herself.
She is very mature. And you know, I just remember having conversations with Brooke that at a very young age that I felt really uncomfortable having to say to her, you know, but they were conversations that, you know, maybe you have with an older kid but there was just this moment where she was like, I don't have any friends. And I knew she didn't have any friends, and I knew why she didn't have any friends. And there's just this moment where do you lie and just say, no, of course you have friends, people like you? Or do you just have this really painful moment where you're like, no, you really don't. And she'll just look at me, and I was like, you don't. And do you want to know why? And she'll say, is it because I say mean things? And I was like, yeah, you do. And we're going to work on it. And you know what? You can be as honest with people as you want, and we're gonna work on why are you saying these mean things, and we're gonna work on taking a deep breath and calming down and then speaking. And you know, and I always said to Brooke, I just remember, and I don't know if it's a true statistic, but in my mind, I just know, you know, you think back to all the kids you grew up with, right? When nobody was talking about anxiety and ADD, and I just think to myself, I'm like, Brooke, you were diagnosed in 3rd grade. Like there are kids in high school right now that don't even know that there's a problem, and you know, by the time they get help, maybe it's too late. Like you're going to have 6 years of help before you get to high school. Right. You're going to be a pro by then, and so you know, I in many ways I think it was a blessing that we were able to identify her super early, but super painful to have some of these conversations with her so young. You know.
Yeah. It's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so unfortunately,
Oh, yeah,
we are
yeah.
out of time, which is terrible because I could sit here
We
all day.
could! We could!
So I just want to let everybody know that if you want to hear more of Dena's experience and other parents, you can go check out episode 1 of In It at u.org/podcast. And then you can go check out Dena's Facebook Live show,
And
Sip, Share, Advocate. And our own Bob Cunningham will be
yes,
on
Bob
with
is
you.
joining us. Yep. So Sip Share Advocate is the first Monday of every month, and we have experts that come in the kitchen. We have wine. We talk about many different topics that come under the same umbrella that you guys function under. So yeah.
Yep, I think you and Bob are talking about
Anxiety. Yes.
May 13th.
Is it May 13th?
As far as we
Okay,
know,
that's
it's
the
May
second
13th.
Monday. Okay.
And so everybody join in, and I just want to say thanks, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.